So, for everybody that is here, and when I say everybody, it's with a view to the people in the future seeing this as well. Welcome. I am absolutely delighted to have Dan with us this afternoon. It's been a long conversation that we've been having over the past few months with regards to actually putting something in place, and I'm delighted that the day has finally come. Dan has an awful lot of experience within production, TV, film, all of that sort of thing, and has come along this afternoon to be able to give his thoughts on CVs, how his career has been navigated, and the way in which the CV has helped with that. And then we're probably going to go into a bit of wider discussion about cover letters and internships and how that all sort of intertwines with the CV. So I will open this up to Dan. Thank you very much for coming along. Really appreciate it. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Pleasure. And yeah, I mean, by all accounts, this is really nice and open. If you've got any questions as we go, please just chip in, raise your hand, whatever. I'll try and answer as we go. Keep it free flowing. So as Ben says, my name's Dan. I am an executive producer for Territory Studio. Territory are a motion graphics studio at heart, but we also do experiential, new technology, VFX, and a wide variety of things. And that, as you will see, kind of ties into my experience, which is also quite free range, I suppose. I originally from a small town in Dorset in the middle of the countryside, and I was, as a child, pretty introverted and wanted to be an artist. I went through school kind of ducking and diving and went to university. And what I'm going to do, just to sort of lay this out, I mean, I'll show you some of, I managed to dig up some of my old CVs today, so we can point at and laugh at. And they were actually come up to quite recently, and there's still mistakes I'm making with CVs, it would seem. But it's also worth saying that over the years and the different types of jobs that I've had, I've seen an awful lot of inbound CVs as well, and hired off the back of that kind of work as well. And it's interesting to see how that's changed over the years, certainly from a personal perspective, but also as someone who has to manage and hire as well. So just back to sort of what I do to try and give it perspective in general. Right now, executive producer for Territory. The executive producer has lots of different meanings across different areas of the industry. In particular, for the kind of work that I do and for Territory, executive producer means managing projects and inbound inquiries from a kind of a studio perspective. I look after the kind of the creative interests of the studio. I look after the financial interests of the studio, and I also try and help the clients' needs as well. So it's kind of I take one step back from so the day-to-day production, but I've got a kind of an eye over everything, as it were. I will share screen now so you can sort of see where I've come from. So this is a CV of mine from, I think it's 2008. This is about as far back as I can find them. Everything before that seems to be on some sort of hard drive somewhere, or on a CD-ROM that I now can't use, or it's probably on a memory stick which got sat on. So unfortunately, I can't go back to the days when my CVs were done in like impact font, or I had very little on it. But I'll run you through kind of this CV, and it kind of gives you a little potted history of where I got to sort of when I last round of kind of big CV action that I was kind of going through. You'll be able to see A, how old I am, B, how stupid some of my old email addresses were, and also you can plot the course of my where I've lived in London. So I'll come into the kind of this personal statement a little bit later. You can see I went to a posh sixth form and did art, AS, design, technology, maths and physics. Maths and physics didn't do so well at. But I then went on to Birmingham to do a visual communications course in Birmingham. I did that visual communications course because A, I managed to talk my way into it without a arts foundation year, and also B, because it covered lots of different areas. My background was really varied from sort of day one. So I've, illustration, graphics, photography, filmmaking, but I specialized in filmmaking. So when I went down, whilst I was doing that in Birmingham, I took on, I sort of went round to the BBC studio, Pebble Mill in Birmingham, and basically demanded that I work for them. Because there was nothing better to do it was either that or work in the hospital canteen. So I did that for one summer, and actually then following that, the next summer I went back and did some more, working on I think it even still going. I think there's a TV series called Doctors, which is like a training ground for young people in the BBC. But it was
I remember that from the days of coming home. If lectures finished around lunchtime, you get home, you just stick on the telly in the background. Doctors usually was on around that sort of time.
Well, Ben, I was never home that early from lectures, but I did work. From there, I graduated from university with a 2-1, and the day I finished, my mum came to my university, picked up all my stuff to take it back to Dorset, and left me with a large rucksack. And my mum went down the motorway, and I got on the train and went to London.
Nice.
And in the back of my bag, I had about 30 VHS tapes with my show reel of the films that I made during my course at university. And I arrived in London at the station and just walked around Soho posting VHSs through letterboxes. You'd be pleased to know that out of those 30 odd tapes that I posted, only one ever made its way back to me. And I only had one response, and that was the response. My response was literally having it posted back to me.
Right, okay.
It was, and he was posted back to me with someone else's tape as well. So I don't know who that other person was, but they never got theirs back. So that's that kind of the eye opening I had as I arrived in London as a sort of a fresh graduate. But off the back of that, and I spent about a month and a half sat in an internet cafe in North London just applying for work through what at the time was called Mandy.com. And I got some work experience on a TV show called Harry and Kosh, which was like a teenage comedy running out of Teddington Studios. And I was a camera trainee on that. So kind of natural progression from the stuff I was doing at the BBC. That was great. But a little bit, well, it was very low paid. It was pretty dog's body, and it was really erratic in terms of like when the series finished, there was nothing else lined up. Again, I went back to the sort of the internet cafe, sat there for a month or two, applying away, plugging away. I managed to get an interview at this company called Partisan, who, with limited internet access, I found out had done some music videos, which I absolutely loved. And I went in there and had an interview. And it turned out the guy that they'd hired previously for the job had had a problem with wind, and the girl didn't want him anymore, so she hired me instead.
Wow.
Yeah, so go figure. But this was really fortuitous, because this company, Partisan, worked with some of the world's best directors, and it was really its heyday. So I was working alongside Michel Gondry, Tractor, some real greats, and they were making work for White Stripes, Radiohead, Kylie. All these music videos were going on, which is kind of one of my sort of major inspirations as a young person. But they were also doing commercial work as well. And at this point, I probably still harbored this kind of desire and urge to be a director, but I was sat around people who were, at the top of their game. I'm really excelling. And I found that one of the things that I enjoyed probably more so than sort of fudging my own music videos on the weekend was talking to the directors, working with them on the pitches, and assisting them in terms of curating little montage show reels and getting them work. A friend of mine pointed at the lady who was doing the sales for the company and said, "You should be doing her work." And I kind of took that to heart, and so I quit in a sort of like in a rash, slightly. Well, I don't know. I think I made the decision in a day, and I was out the door the next. And my boss at the time was just like, "What are you doing? Why are you leaving? This is just insane." but I kind of, I don't think I would do that anymore, put it that way. But it was that kind of impetuous youth that I just kind of was like, right, I've made my decision. I'm going to do something different. Well, I'm off. We're off to London to find my fortune.
Yeah.
I went from West London to Central London and got a job with this company called Cowboy Films. And I started my life in a new business, and I went out into sort of ad agencies and record labels and started talking to people about a roster of directors that we were working with, people like Tim Pope, feature film directors like Mike Lee, and trying to get them work with the advertising agencies and record labels and charities and brands, and doing that kind of work. And it was really, really challenging, very for someone who was quite introverted to sort of switch that into and force myself into a position where I was actually wandering the streets of London, meeting people for the first time and actually trying to tell them things. It was really quite a life change.
Yeah.
But very, very, very satisfying as well.
So so at this point, this is, I'm guessing this CD was made around sort of 2003, 2004, something like that.
Exactly that. So I mean, 2004, and I've just kind of been doing the time, maybe 2004 to 2005. We'll find out the next one.
I mean, just looking at this CV at the moment, and obviously at the time, this was what you wanted to present and showcase to the world. Looking back at it now, what would be the things that you would perhaps advise yourself, having had another sort of 15 years worth of experience on top of it now?
Well, interestingly, I was trying to accomplish something. So at this point, I guess at each sort of job change or life jump that I've done, I've always tried to sort of focus on something new and a new sort of, a new skill set that I wanted to garner. So at this point, I was really enjoying the new business aspect, but I also really wanted to have production under my belt as well. I wanted to be able to produce a job and see it through from end to end, not just kind of find the job and then give it to someone else. And there was no point of me there was no chance of me doing that at Cowboy Films, so I needed to find somewhere new.
So funny enough, I mean, the way in which you were looking at your CV then was kind of a cool, this is where I've got to at the moment, but it was also identifying perhaps the gaps in which you were like, oh, I need more experience, as you said, within production. I want to be able to get more skills within these particular things. So you're looking at that document as a kind of work in progress of where you see yourself going. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And often you don't have the prerequisite skills for the next stage, by any stroke. I could have, I suppose, at this point, have used my weekends and gone off and produced music videos with friends, or and that's certainly something I've seen other people do. But I think at this point, I knew I'd made lots of new friends, and I'd met a lot of new people, and I was testing the water, and I was putting this out there. I would say that that's quite a sort of a recurring theme as I keep moving through what I'm doing. The next stage is always kind of like ambition and not necessarily something. And I've always worked on the basis that cross transferable skills is a real true thing that I think employers do look for, and they don't look for conventional employees. A lot of the time. I've certainly never have. I've never sort of based my opinion of someone on whether or not they have done the job before. Whilst I was at Partisan, I had to hire an assistant because the girl who hired me left quite quickly. Not because I had wind, but she just left quite quickly. She wanted to do a job change as well. And I hired an assistant, and that guy, his CV, interestingly, I wish I still had it for you. Steve came to me, and he'd been an engineer, like an electrician, in a sort of a media company in town, who did lots of rewiring of machines, and he wanted a job change, and he came to me. And interesting, the thing on his CV, which was totally the thing that made me go, this guy is the one, was the fact that he looked at a couple of our directors in detail, and I'm pretty sure he lied, and he told me he'd been to a seminar by one of them at the BFI, and that he loved their work and he knew a couple of things, and just that plain fact set him, apart from the crowd, who none of them particularly knew what Partisan was about, or had that kind of extra level of interest that they'd gone the extra mile. Interestingly, that was Steve's first step, and he's now an executive producer, has worked for Wyden and Kennedy, Stink Studios, and is now working for Edelman, who are like one of the world's biggest PR firms.
Yeah, and I mean that's really interesting and useful to know, because a lot of people that will be watching this will have started out with we all start at some point with no experience, whether it be right at the beginning or whether you've had a career and then you're looking to change it and demonstrate to people that you are capable of doing it, and then being able to actually to fulfill that by having a CV that actually captures people's imagination, perhaps even having a show reel that relates to that as well, that is able to say, I haven't been employed before, but I can do this, and this is how I can do it, and this is why.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do, and I've always struggled with it. It's become clear to me that I've always struggled with it, just looking at this, because representing yourself is possibly one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do. Telling other people why they're good or bad is actually is easy with sort of perspective, but when you're talking about yourself, you have to be quite, not ruthless, but you have to take a step back, and that is hard to do. You can see here this CV. I've suddenly got loads of. Go on, Ben.
Sorry, I apologise for cutting in. I was just going to ask that what you've just mentioned there with regards to taking a look at yourself. Sometimes it's difficult to see where things are going wrong until you sort of look back and go, oh, okay, this job wasn't right for me because of this or whatever. But also, is it fair to say that it's sometimes we can be a bit too hard on ourselves, and actually it's difficult to sometimes see what our qualities are, which we should be showcasing to employers?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think the benefit of hindsight is a wonderful thing, obviously. I mean, certainly one of the things I would say is, having that confidence to fail is something which I think it was something I was learning on the job, certainly. And I've never looked at anything as a failure or a wrong decision, because I've always learned from those. Someone asked me recently, I will admit this, while I was talking to them about a new potential role, they said, oh, who's the best person you've ever worked with, and why were they so good? And I said, well, there's been a couple of people, and I said, these people were good for these reasons, but they're not perfect, but they were really good, and this is what I learned from them. And they said, oh, who's the worst person you ever worked with? I said, oh God. I said, oh, well, this person was pretty bad. I said, but do you know how much I learned from that person? It was just, it was, immeasurable, because I saw in that person things that I didn't want to do. And when I went on to my next job, which was one small step, which you see here, which was this kind of leap, I was in a position to start actually making those changes, and I was given enough space to be able to kind of make it my own, and that was a great thing. So certainly I've never looked at any kind of person's influence on my life as a bad thing, because even the bad people, they're not really bad, they're just generally quite selfish, have taught me loads, and no regrets, always moving forward, certainly. And that goes with people I've collaborated with. There's a few names on these lists, so I kind of like, yeah, I wouldn't work with them again. But and I think about the on a film set or in an office, there's always people, you can't get on with everyone, but and you never know who you're applying to as well with a job. And sometimes you're trying to make your CV kind of like a bit of a catch-all. And I think looking at some of these are sort of catch-alls. And I also went back through my email history, which was for my second Hotmail address, I think, after I got rid of kriegercat@hotmail.com and decided to go for something a bit more like professional. And right at the bottom, I can see how many people I've applied to, and I've applied to an awful lot. Some of them are really not, jobs that I think are now very applicable, but I've kind of got out there and so a lot of the CVs you're seeing here are kind of catch-alls, or this one specifically, I suppose, was about how much I produced and how trustworthy I was, or how much experience I had in a certain field. I'll just try and the next one. And this one, for some unfeasible reason, I decided to use the company font, even though I was trying to leave the company, or just try and move on from the company. Because at this point, and this is worth pointing out, One Small Step was the best thing I've ever done, but it was also the worst thing I've ever done. In the 2008 sort of credit crisis, downturn, we really fell foul, because a lot of our directors were from America, and no one was hiring American directors. So we'd gone from actually doubling revenue and doing really well and high fives all round, to basically being really quite hard up against it. So myself and my business partner decided to close our company down before we lost all our friends and couldn't pay people, and we did that. And it was a really tough decision. And it was after this that I started then nosing around sort of for more work. And actually, you can see here, I've actually made this look relatively professional, but I got rid of the list of things, because the list of things wasn't relevant. No one really wanted to know if I'd done a Galaxy chocolate advert, but what they really wanted to know was, like, what I've actually done. What were my achievements when I did these roles? And this was a bit more of a sort of a generalized thing, but I was sending this out to some quite interesting people. But in actual fact, I didn't stay out of work very long, because another production company wanted me to come over and bring my directors with me, which I did.
I was going to say, actually, that's a really good point, because of the network connections that you've made over the course of the last sort of 5 or 7 years, or however long it is that up to the point. There are an awful lot of people that that become valuable assets for when you are looking to pitch yourself to other organizations. The fact that you might be able to bring in this additional business, additional contacts that may well form more projects for people. Is that something that you were kind of aware of, or was it only realized once they said, oh, can you bring these people in as well?
I guess I've become increasingly aware of it over the years. I suppose that becomes more apparent as your options grow. It's easy to say that when you've been working in an industry for a long time. When you're first starting out, you've only really got, your mates or the people that you've met. And, people talk about networking, and it's a bit of a dirty word, as it were. But, if you make friends, or you respect people, you work with good people, those people you can call on and ask for advice. And I did that at certain points during my career. I've gone out and I've gone into agencies. In actual fact, when I left Partisan Films, I think one of the directors knew a producer in an ad agency, and he said, oh, you should go and see Ruben. And it was the first person I'd ever met at an ad agency. And I went and met him and had him, and he just gave me some advice. It was great. And, that's through people I respect and love, kind of going, oh, do you know what? You're a really nice guy. You should go and speak to this person. I think you get on. And in actual fact, I haven't spoken to Ruben for years, but quite a few of the people I've spoken to in those days I still see and I still keep up with. And it just goes to show, you've got to be nice on the way up, so that, people are nice to you on the way down, as it were. But
yeah, I mean, I was going to say, you have, as far as I'm concerned, you've come full circle, because I remember reaching out to you over the summer, sort of saying, hey, I'm sort of looking for a bit of help, etc. And your response to me was, yeah, what can I do, kind of thing. And sort of in a broader context, that's particularly this year, but it seems to be more apparent now that what you've said in terms of reaching out to people and offering help, seeing what you can do, and not necessarily going, right, I've got to this point in my career, I don't need to deal with this level of people anymore. you're being a lot more open to it, which means there are a lot more opportunities available.
There's enough people like that out there already, don't worry. It's it is important. I've learned that, by all accounts. I said, we closed down One Small Step, our production company. I think it says on my in my LinkedIn profile, it's like we closed One Small Step in 2010, but kept all our friends.
Nice.
I think that is crucial. I think recommendations, referrals, and building up a like I said, a network is really important. And I've got a long list of people's, got an Excel sheet. It's super basic, and I just keep a list of all the people with names and addresses, and just keep it that way.
Amazing.
When I first went to Cowboy Films, I was going to get to this later on. I got sidetracked. I think one of the major things that's put me in good stead is through the ages is knowing your industry and being interested in your industry. And this was crucial. So when I went to Cowboy Films, I've been working in Partisan, and then Partisan, they used to get sent like monthly magazines, which cost a fortune. And what I would do at the time was just like, well, I can't afford the magazines, so I'd take them all, and before anyone turned up at work, I'd photocopy all the interesting pages, and I'd cut them out and then paste them into a notebook. And in the end, the notebook ended up being like that fat. And I had pages for directors, and I had pages for production companies, and kind of categorized it. Now, obviously you can just do that in Evernote or on your computer, but at the time that was not an option. Making myself sound like old Father Time, but
there's always use for a sketchbook, though, right?
Totally. And I walked into my first meeting with Bobby, who ran Cowboy Films, and I showed him this book, and he went, yeah, he said, that's brilliant. He said, the knowledge in those pages, he said, this is great, and you know it all.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, of course I do. But that alone really kind of, he was telling people about that 3 years later. I think he probably still, when I see him, he probably does, he still brings it up. But it was really me wanting to know more, doing my research, and that's definitely something. And it's the same thing about Steve. Steve, when I tell you about when he was coming to Partisan, he'd done his research and he knew who he was talking to, and he wanted to seem engaged and interested and targeted, I suppose.
Might steal that idea, because the amount of publications that the library receives at the university every month, updating information, it's valuable asset. So if you don't mind, I'm going to steal that little valuable nugget of information and start.
It's in the palm of your hand now. That's the beauty of it. It's in your iPhone. All you got to do is save to, and go straight into Evernote or whatever. And I do some of this stuff now still, and whether it's an image or a screenshot, and just stick it somewhere, and it's there forever, or attach it to a meeting, or all this stuff is now on your phone. It makes things really, really easy, and you can just reference things like that. So before you walk into a meeting, it helped. I've got quite a good memory for this stuff, so I kind of store it upstairs as well. But over the years, what I talk to people about and go into meetings with has changed. But caring about your industry is a big thing, and proving to people that you're not just, it sets you apart. And you want to, one of the things I look at these CVs and I just go, I don't seem very unique. And that's often a hard thing to do. I think at the time I was so keen to prove my professionalism and worth that I kind of left off some of the kind of the more interesting things. But there is a balance with that. I think there's another one. I'm trying to find, you can see another version. There was a version where I sort of put some interest at the bottom, and it just read pretty terribly. I have seen some CVs in the past where you're reading them and you're like, interest, traveling, reading, TV, gymnastics, and you're like, oh, gymnastics. But it's really, it's weird how it's difficult. It's so difficult to be unique, and to distill things down to a page. And I will say that that's a big thing. People are, you can see on this more recent one here. So I dallied around. I went to Stamp for a little bit, went to Delphi, and I ended up at the Mill. And here I've added my Twitter account to this, which is a bit of a risk considering what's on my Twitter account. but it's interesting to see that, you know, people will go cyber stalk you if they want to. You know, it's not like I've done it in the past. If I'm interested in someone, I think, well, they're interesting, I want to see more of what they're doing. I do this on LinkedIn all the time. I'll go look at their Instagram feed.
It's a valuable asset as well to be able to correlate the information that is being put on the CV and actually understand creatively what that imagery kind of looks like, and being able to also, you know, I recommend to students to perhaps start thinking about posting examples of their sketchbook, you know, scribbled ideas, the ways in which they creatively think, go about problem solving. It doesn't all have to be purpose-made, completed, finished, beautiful pieces of artwork. It can be the process that's gone on there. And if an employer like yourself is able to catch on to that and see all of these, it might actually say more information than it was first anticipated to do.
Yeah, and there's so many different job roles, and you know, you know, I don't know who's going to see this and the type of jobs they're going for, but there's, you know, but just knowing who you're talking to, you will spook people out if you come up with personal details, and you know, if you tell them, you know, their wife's name, then you know, that's going to have an adverse effect. But if you look at them and go, oh, they seem like a nice person, or oh, look, they really enjoy this, or oh, I can see that they were on a shoot last week. You know, that's kind of, it's interesting and useful information. It just gives you a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And certainly if you look at, you know, a company or employer's Instagram page, or, you know, or articles they put on LinkedIn, then you might well get that extra level of information that might just, you know, separate you from the crowd.
Yeah. What's interesting about this particular CV is the development that's happened since you were One Small Step Films. You know, we saw the CV kind of went on to 2 pages because it had all of the list of the productions you've been on, and now that your career has moved forward a few years, you've worked at other companies, and now you've been able to sort of assess that and go, right, this is the way that I now want to present all of this information. So it's a really good example. If there is not necessarily a strict right and wrong way to go about the CV, it is about presenting the right kinds of information at the right kind of time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was a time when I had like 3 or 4 different versions of my CV, and I was sending them out to different types of company. After Stamp Films, who I wasn't there very long, but not many people were. I went actually, I decided I wanted to go and work in an advertising agency, and that was an interesting set of conversations with people who I'd met over the years. But I did a CV for them, which was slightly more targeted in terms of, like, you know, what I'm good at and what I can do. But this is kind of more along the lines of what's ended up on my LinkedIn, actually, which is, you know, descriptors of what I was doing and why that was important. I think that's probably the better end of one. And this is all very easy to do when you're working in slightly more senior positions, and, you know, Partisan Films, for instance, is quite a hard one to kind of glamorize, because I was in a tape room making show reels with directors. The glamour was in the people I was working with, not the work I was doing.
Yeah.
So it is difficult to dress up sometimes, especially when you're starting out.
Yeah.
My wife reminded me today that I was only earning $8,000 at Partisan Films, $8,000 a year, and apparently she went into a clothes shop and bought a denim skirt and nearly fainted because she was worried about the expense. So how things change, you know, it's mad. We were, you know, but it is interesting to see how kind of what can be important for some people, but, you know, for certain job roles is really different for others. And for my liking, a description of what's going on is often a bit more interesting.
Yeah.
So in this one, you can see, you know, it's a bit non-anything at the top. I'm a confident, intuitive new business leader. It sounds awful, isn't it? But, you know, it's kind of the stuff that people get through. I mean, I guess there is a little bit in here which is a bit more me, but it's a lot to read, I would say. I think you've got to make a difference, and often that comes from covering letters.
Yeah.
And so that is what I'll move on to next. And this is why I wanted to talk to you, because this lovely lady, Sabrina Church, came to me, and I've had a permission to show you this. What you see on the left is a mock-up that she did, because she doesn't actually have the original bits that she sent me. It was beautiful. It arrived on my desk when I was at the mill, and I mean, as you can tell, I'm still in touch with Sabrina. I think she's amazing, and I really wanted for her to work at the mill. And it turned up, and there was a packet of stroopwafels from Amsterdam, where she was living at the time, some tea bags, and these really nice printed pieces of paper. And it had this little kind of thing on it saying, step 1, try a stroopwafel, make a cup of tea, have another stroopwafel, then sit back and read my CV. First of all, I'm like, okay, right, I'm interested. I love stroopwafels. But what was in there was not a printed CV. It was a covering letter, which very quickly got to the nub of it. She didn't outright say it, but she'd been recommended to talk to me by someone who was one of my clients. But it was just a really quick thing which showed that she'd done a research. She says here about Fanta work that we'd done at the mill that she'd seen that really was really something she was interested in. So straight away I kind of knew what she was about, what she wanted to do next. And she gave me a really clear idea of what's going on and why. And then there was a QR code for me to scan, and of course I scanned it, and I'll show you if I can a website which I think is a really nice CV. So this is Sabrina's website. Please don't, she's lovely, so don't go hassling her and asking her things, because she's very kindly let me do this. But she's Scottish lassie, so currently living in London. And some of this, bless her, is quite, you put yourself out there with the CV sometimes, and she's really put herself out there. And she's working in a really creative advertising agency in Amsterdam. She used to do theatre, so she's quite a character. She's got some quotes in there, and then you go into her resume and what she's been up to. MPC. This MPC is experience she's put in there since I looked at it. So it was 72 Sunny production coordinator. There's a referral, there's a quote from her boss saying why she's great. I scroll down, I can see that, she did this before, and then there's a bit more. There's another quote from someone else who thinks she's great, and so just straight away I'm like, she's obviously well liked and she's great. I should probably be talking to her. And there's just a little bit at the bottom about her education.
There's been well thought out in terms of recognizing where every place fits, having then that kind of personal touch to it in terms of the somebody else providing an opinion that is useful to employers, and
so that's quite an endorsement,
and it's also quite a confident thing as well, to sort of be able to feel confident enough to actually put that about yourself. It's not overindulgent, it's not too confident, but at the same time you are trying to put the best version of yourself forward, and if somebody else has been able to contribute towards that, then putting that in is a nice thing to be able to do, as opposed to sort of looking big-headed by making up a quote about yourself or saying, I'm the best you'll find, you won't find anyone better than me.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? You kind of, luckily these quotes are they're chosen well, and the people have been briefed well, it seems. They're not sort of going, she's the best, hire her. Or these are well-mannered, well thought through kind of.
But that line there where it says she's undaunted by new experiences and perceives how she can help or make the function as a whole move more smoothly, that's the kind of thing that you would imagine, unless people are really focused on it, you can imagine that's the kind of thing that people would put in their profile on their CV, right at the top, which can get a little bit lost unless it's attached to a particular experience that they were doing. So the fact that there is the name of the actual person that has said this about her, and it is attributed to that particular experience, provides anybody that's so much more information about that particular thing, which is which is the whole point of, you know, that profile section at the top. But you were saying, you know, you were judging your own CV to say it's a bit too long, it's a bit wishy-washy. Being able to get like little handle holds for people to grab onto and then sort of find them further down and then invest in them further on.
Yeah, absolutely. In the old days, you'd be like, you know, references upon request or something like on the bottom of a couple of these. And it's like, well, that's not really, you know, no one's actually going to, you know, very rarely have people ever rang me up for references.
Yeah.
I suppose in my time, I suppose I've had about 3 or 4 people ring me up for references, and I've just, you know, gone, yeah, they're great, you know, hire them. But it's, you know, in these things up here, I've tried to say some of the things that actually, in fact, Sabrina's bosses have said about her already.
Yeah.
And from someone else's mouth, it actually comes across as far more, you know, important and trustworthy, rather than me saying to everyone, I mean, I'm undaunted by new experiences, and I'm, you know, it's actually a really good thing. And you know, you have to park your humility slightly and go like, do you know what, that is actually something to be proud of.
Yep, absolutely. So I mean, looking at where your CVs have gone to the present day now, as somebody that is you know, more sort of looking at CVs from other people rather than your own, what sort of what would be the first thing that you would look, let's say, I mean, mind my asking, how many applications on average do you get for any number of jobs? I'm sure they're perhaps slightly different depending on the job.
Well, it really is, and it depends on whether your company's the currently territory generally hire quite specialist artist roles, and so we go to a lot of recruiters, and we have recruiters who find them for us. So that's interesting in itself. So they'll do a lot of the hard work in terms of selling you in, because they have to vouch for you in the first place. But that's for someone who's a After Effects wizard or a graphic designer, you know, who's doing something specific.
Yeah.
And more recently, we actually hired a marketing manager, and that marketing manager CV went out, and I was surprised at how few responses we got. I think we had about 50. In the past, say for instance at Adelphi, when we used to put out a job for a music producer, we used to get 200 to 300, but they went out on Guardian and LinkedIn.
Right.
So we had a lot of applicants for those jobs.
Yeah. And so you get them go into the inbox, or they arrive by post or whatever. Obviously, you're not going to be spending, you know, hours or even minutes reading them. It's probably going to be a quite sort of short fire snap decision about whether or not to continue with someone's CV. What are the kind of things that are sort of the catch points for you?
I mean, you know, as you can see from the CVs that I've done in the past, they're slightly kind of, you know, they're hard work a lot of the time. So you need to catch people's attention before you even get to that page.
Right.
So covering letter, or even, you know, a paragraph, no need to overwork it. But, you know, quite honestly, your tone of voice should be your personality slightly, but it's very much saying, I understand this job, I understand this company, and this is why I would like to apply.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, that's my if that's an opening gambit, that's pretty good for me. It's kind of saying, right, Dan, I love Territory Studio. You know, particularly this piece of work which I saw last week. I saw the new David Fincher film. I want to work with you guys, and the reason I'm applying for this job is because I've done this thing that gives me, you know, the idea that my skills might work for this role. Straight away, I'm like, right, great.
Move on.
Good pile. And you know, you're in through to the next day. But I will then work my way through your kind of long list of rambling nonsense that I wrote ages ago. But it's, you know, that kind of certainly in an opening gambit stage, you know, making that the point of difference for you is often enough just making sure people understand that you've cared enough to understand the role, the company, and why it's good for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next stage is, you know, it becomes more complicated, but that's a good thing for sure.
To the people that are here, I don't want to hog the floor. If you guys have any questions, then please do feel free to unmute yourselves if there is anything. I mean, I've been quite captivated, to be perfectly honest, in the last sort of 45 minutes. It's been quite nice to. I've never seen information that you provided presented in the way that you have, and it's actually been really insightful to understand how your development has come through at this point. There will be people on this watching this video that will sort of start thinking now about where are they going and what kind of things are going to feature in that intermediate time, and how do they get to that point. Like you were saying earlier, how you were looking at your CV and sort of seeing the things that were missing. So, you know, whether you are a student looking at it at the moment and thinking, well, I've got part-time jobs here and there, but they're not really design related, so I probably need some design related stuff. I mean, that'd be something that I'd be quite interested to ask you, Dan, would be if there are either students or perhaps people that have just graduated that perhaps haven't had the opportunity or given themselves the time to get some industry experience, what would be the kind of things that they could put in the, would you want to see, you know, the part-time work that they've done at McDonald's, or could they put university projects in there, projects that they've done outside of university? What would be the sort of things that might help fill that gap?
It's a tough one, and I've been in that position myself, where you kind of feel like, well, I just haven't got anything to talk about. Why would anyone, you know? But in my experience, you know, showing people your work at companies like, you know, God, I worked in some crazy places, but you know, they've never made it onto my CV because I don't really feel like people needed to know that. If they asked me, I'd be like, yeah, God, you know, I delivered, you know, newspapers, or I, you know, lifted beds for a living. It's not relevant and interesting for me. The cause and why, you know, why I'm having that conversation, or why I'm trying to have that conversation, is the important part. And I think, you know, a level of honesty around that never hurt either. Certainly, you know, a quick, you know, certainly the big thing for me was building up experience in one way, shape, or form. And I know that's very difficult to do often. And some of it was unpaid, which was painful. And some of it was low paid, but
which is just as painful.
But yeah, but it gave me experience that allowed me to take those next steps. And but you know, and you can see from my CVs, I was kind of really keen to show people that I'd done these certain things. In actual fact, it wasn't necessarily what I'd done that was important; it was what I learned.
Yeah,
I think that's, with, you know, with hindsight, that's probably more interesting for an employer. You know, I can come in and say, hey, listen, I've just done this thing. I learned loads. And, you know, what it has shown me is that I really want to do more of this thing. I'd really appreciate a conversation or just a phone call to see whether or not I'm on the right track.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. You know, being able to make an introduction like that to, and again, it buys into the idea that you were saying earlier about the researching of the organizations and the person that you're reaching out to actually say, I've identified your company as the one that will be able to take those skills and allow me to go on to that next step. And I want, in doing that, I want to be able to repay what I learned from you in terms of good quality work that you'll hopefully be able to sell.
You know, there are going to be a number of companies, I think, going into in 2021, who are looking to take on new staff, or they'll be looking to take on recently graduated people, or, you know, people who are still undergraduates in sort of apprenticeship roles. And there are lots of schemes coming through right now. I think is a really good thing, and a lot of those apprenticeship schemes have got money attached to them. Not enough, but a little bit of money attached to them. Ben, you know all about this, I'm sure. But you know, certainly there's been talk of that at Territory, which is really encouraging. you know, I used to get quite a lot of students getting in touch with me with surveys that they were doing. I don't know if you ever come across this, where they'd be like, "Hey, I've been tasked with a project by my university to find out more about your company," and never was the crucial question asked, which was, "I want to do this job. What do I have to do it?"
Yeah.
No one ever asked that. They were like, "How many people in your company? How many? How, what kind of do people move abroad when they work for your company? What does this director do?"
Yeah.
It never really kind of the question they should have been asking is like, I can see that this is the job that I need to do to get in your company.
Yeah.
Or what is the job that I need to do to get into your company?
Yeah.
And how do I do that?
And the other thing is, if they're doing a survey, they're obviously doing it with the purpose of engaging with you. It's perhaps not the right way to go about it. And there is a person on this call who I will keep anonymous, but they actually used a few company names as part of their research that they were doing for a particular brief.
Mm-hmm.
They have subsequently contacted that person to say, "You were an inspiration for the particular work that I was doing. I just wanted to reach out and say I'm a really big fan and thanks very much," etc. And that person actually reached back to them and going, "Oh, that's really great of you to hear. Could I perhaps see the work that you've done?" And that work has subsequently been sent over to them, and with a view for there potentially being a conversation next year that may well lead to a work experience internship. And being able to actually demonstrate to employers, and again, buying into doing the research, being a fan, knowing the content, being able to write to them with actual a body of work that you can present and say, "This is why you guys have been inspirational to me," can only be positive in terms of reaching out. And again, you haven't had to send a CV necessarily or a full-blown cover letter. It has been a general communication.
Yeah, one thing I've learned over the years is that you shouldn't expect too much from, the world.
Yeah.
And certainly when you're looking for work, you will get far less back than you give. And it's often, days will pass and it seems like years.
Yeah.
And you'll be sat there for hours on your computer looking for jobs, and it just feels like the most painful thing in the world. But to the person on the other end, the person you're waiting to respond, to have that person respond, it's been no time whatsoever. They've, the day has flown by. They're probably super busy. It's frustrating for sure. But I think one of the things is if you do engage with people, it has to be a very easy task for them to be able to respond. You have to make it easy for them. Yeah. And play a long game often, and just continually but that certainly that the example you gave about using a company as reference and really loving their work or respecting their work, that personal touch goes an awfully long way.
Yeah.
And it shows that you're not just sending this out to anyone, you're sending it out to someone you deeply want to care work with, and that's always done me proud, certainly.
Yeah, amazing. Unless there are, I've just noticed the time is getting close to people's dinners, etc. The cold months have set in. It is already dark outside. Unless there are any queries or questions, all that remains is for me to just say, Dan, thank you so very, very much. Really, really appreciate you coming on today. It's been one of my favorite sessions actually throughout my whole time in Ravensbourne. So
charmer.
Really and really engaging as well. So very much appreciate time.
If I can, by all accounts, if anyone has any questions or wants to know anything further or wants to pull me up on something I've said, then do get in touch via Ben, and I'll happily get involved. I will make time.
Appreciate your time, Dan. Thank you so very much. Take care.
Nice to meet you all. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.